Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she approached the training field where her squad was practicing with the M249 squad automatic weapon. The morning sun beat down on Fort Carson, Colorado, and she could already hear the familiar sound of automatic fire echoing across the range. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 125 pounds, Maria had always been the smallest person in her unit. She had joined the Army 3 years ago with dreams of proving that size didn't matter when it came to serving her country. But today, like many days before, she would face another reminder that not everyone shared her belief. "Rodriguez," barked Sergeant First Class Thompson, her squad leader. "You're up next on the 249. Maria jogged over to the firing position where the M249 lay waiting. The weapon weighed nearly 17 pounds when fully loaded, and its bipod legs were already extended on the ground. She had fired the weapon before, during basic training. But this was different. This was her chance to prove she belonged in an infantry unit. As she settled into position behind the machine gun, she heard whispers from some of the other soldiers nearby. "She's too small for that thing," one muttered. "The recoil will knock her flat." Another added with a snicker. Maria tried to ignore the comments as she checked the weapon's safety and prepared to engage the targets downrange. The M249 was designed to provide suppressive fire for infantry squads, laying down a heavy volume of bullets to keep enemy forces pinned down while friendly troops maneuvered. It required strength, endurance, and precise control. "On your command, Rodriguez," Thompson called out. Maria took a deep breath, switched off the safety, and squeezed the trigger. The weapon roared to life, spitting out 5.56 millimeters rounds at a rate of 750 rounds per minute. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, but she held firm, keeping the weapon steady as she engaged target after target across the range. When the firing stopped, Thompson walked over to check her performance through his binoculars. The targets showed decent groupings, but Maria could see the disappointment in his face. "Not bad, Rodriguez. But you're struggling with target transitions. The weapon's getting away from you during longer bursts." "I can do better, Sergeant," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her frustration. Thompson shook his head. "Look, Rodriguez. You're a good soldier. But maybe you should consider a different military occupation specialty. The M249 requires someone who can handle its weight and power effectively. Have you thought about supply or communications?" The suggestion hit Maria like a slap. She had worked harder than anyone else in her unit, studying tactics, maintaining her equipment to perfection, and pushing herself through every physical challenge. But here she was, being told she wasn't suitable for the very job she had trained for. "With respect, Sergeant, I know I can handle this weapon. Give me more time to practice." Other squad members gathered around, some shaking their heads sympathetically while others looked uncomfortable with the conversation. Private Jackson, one of the newer soldiers, spoke up. "Sarge is right, Rodriguez. You're tough. But that gun needs someone with more muscle mass." Specialist Williams, who had been in the unit longer, added, "It's not about being tough, it's about physics. The 249 gunner has to be able to move with that weapon, carry extra ammunition, and still fight effectively. Maybe you should focus on your marksmanship with the M4 instead." Maria felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. But she kept her voice controlled. "I understand your concerns, but I believe I can overcome any physical limitations through training and technique." Thompson considered her words for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "All right, Rodriguez. I'll give you 2 more weeks to improve your performance with the 249. But if you can't meet the standards by then, you're moving to a different position in the squad." As the training session ended and the squad packed up their equipment, Maria stayed behind to clean the M249. She ran her hands along the weapon's barrel, feeling its weight and bulk. Everyone thought she was too small, too weak, too unsuitable for this role. But Maria had never backed down from a challenge in her life. That evening, she went to the base library and checked out every manual she could find about machine gun tactics and employment. She studied the technical specifications of the M249, learning about its cyclic rate, effective range, and proper maintenance procedures. She read about famous machine gunners from previous wars, both male and female, who had made crucial differences in battle. Over the next few days, Maria spent every free moment practicing with the M249. She worked on her stance, her grip, and her breathing techniques. She practiced transitioning between targets and controlling her bursts of fire. The weapon began to feel more natural in her hands, like an extension of her own body. But the real challenge came during squad exercises. When the unit conducted live fire drills, Maria had to carry the M249 along with extra ammunition, moving from position to position while maintaining accuracy and fire discipline. The weight was punishing, especially during longer missions, but she refused to show any weakness. During one particularly difficult exercise, the squad was tasked with advancing across rough terrain while under simulated enemy fire. Maria struggled with the weight of her equipment, falling behind the rest of the squad. When they reached their objective, Thompson pulled her aside. "Rodriguez, you're slowing down the whole squad. When you can't keep up, it puts everyone at risk." "I can do this, Sergeant. I just need to build up my endurance." Endurance isn't the only issue. In a real firefight, you need to be able to maneuver quickly and respond to threats immediately. If you're struggling just to carry the weapon, how can you be effective with it? Maria knew he was right, but she wasn't ready to give up. That night, she started a new training routine, focusing on building functional strength, specifically for her role as a machine gunner. She carried weighted packs on long runs, practiced weapon drills until her muscles ached, and worked on her core stability to better handle the M249's recoil. The other members of her squad watched her efforts with a mixture of respect and skepticism. Some admired her determination, while others believed she was wasting her time fighting against biological reality. As the 2-week deadline approached, Maria knew this was her last chance to prove herself. The final test would be a comprehensive squad exercise, where each member would be evaluated on their performance in their assigned role. For Maria, it meant demonstrating that she could effectively employ the M249 in a tactical situation. The night before the test, she lay in her bunk, thinking about all the obstacles she had faced. From the moment she had decided to join the infantry, people had questioned whether she belonged. Some had been openly hostile, while others had been well-meaning but equally discouraging. But Maria had learned something important during her time in the army. The only opinion that truly mattered was her own belief in herself. Tomorrow would determine whether she would continue as a machine gunner or be reassigned to a different role. But regardless of the outcome, Maria knew she had given everything she had to prove that she belonged. The real test wouldn't be about whether she was strong enough for the M249, but whether the M249 was ready for someone with her determination and skill. As she drifted off to sleep, Maria could hear the sound of distant gunfire from the night training exercises. Soon, she would have her chance to show everyone what she was truly capable of. The weapon they said she was unsuitable for was about to become the tool through which she would define her entire military career. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge every assumption about who could and couldn't be a machine gunner in the modern military. Maria Rodriguez was ready to fight not just for her position in the squad, but for the right of every soldier to be judged on their performance rather than their appearance. The morning of Maria's final evaluation arrived with an unexpected twist. Instead of the controlled training environment she had been expecting, Sergeant First Class Thompson announced that the exercise would simulate a real combat mission in urban terrain. "Listen up," Thompson addressed the squad as they gathered their gear. "Intelligence reports indicate enemy forces have taken control of a small village. Our mission is to clear the area and establish security. Rodriguez, you'll be providing suppressive fire from designated positions while the rest of the squad advances." Maria felt her heart racing as she checked her equipment one final time. The M249 was loaded with a full belt of ammunition, and she carried additional rounds in her assault pack. The weight felt familiar now, almost comfortable after weeks of intensive training. The exercise began at dawn. Maria's squad moved through the mock village, encountering pop-up targets and simulated enemy positions. When Thompson gave the signal, Maria set up her bipod behind a concrete barrier and began engaging targets to suppress enemy fire. The M249 performed flawlessly in her hands. She controlled her bursts precisely, switching between targets with smooth efficiency. When the squad needed to advance, Maria quickly collapsed her bipod, shouldered the weapon, and moved to the next firing position without slowing the team's progress. As the exercise reached its climax, the squad encountered a complex scenario where multiple enemy positions threatened their advance. Maria found herself in a crucial role, providing covering fire that allowed her teammates to maneuver safely. Her accuracy and fire discipline were exactly what the situation required. When the exercise ended, Thompson approached Maria with an expression she had never seen before: genuine respect. "Rodriguez, that was exceptional work. You've earned your position as our squad's machine gunner." The other squad members gathered around, offering congratulations and admitting they had been wrong about her capabilities. Private Jackson, who had been one of her harshest critics, shook her hand and said, "I owe you an apology. You've proven you belong here." 3 months later, Maria found herself in a very different environment. Her unit had been deployed to Afghanistan, stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in the eastern part of the country. The base was located in a strategic valley surrounded by mountains, serving as a supply hub and staging area for operations throughout the region. The transition from training exercises to real combat operations was jarring. Every patrol carried the possibility of enemy contact, and Maria quickly learned that the weight of the M249 felt different when lives depended on her performance. The dry, dusty terrain of Afghanistan presented new challenges, requiring constant maintenance of her weapon to prevent malfunctions caused by sand and debris. During her first month in country, Maria participated in several minor engagements. Her role was primarily defensive, providing overwatch for convoys and patrol bases. She had fired her weapon in anger only a few times, brief exchanges of gunfire with insurgents who quickly melted away into the mountainous terrain. But Maria could sense that something bigger was building. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in their area of operations. Taliban fighters were reportedly massing for a significant attack, though their exact target remained unknown. The warning signs became more obvious as weeks passed. Local villagers who had been friendly to American forces suddenly became distant and unwilling to provide information. Patrol routes that had been safe for months began showing signs of recent enemy reconnaissance. Improvised explosive devices were discovered with increasing frequency along the roads leading to the base. Captain Morrison, the company commander, called his squad leaders together for a briefing that would change everything. Maria watched through the window of the command post as Thompson and the other sergeants gathered around a map table, their expressions growing more serious as the captain spoke. When Thompson returned to brief the squad, his news confirmed what everyone had been sensing. "We've received credible intelligence that the Taliban is planning a major assault on our position within the next 48 hours. They're bringing fighters from across the region, possibly 200 to 300 insurgents." The squad members exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of the situation. Forward Operating Base Chapman housed approximately 150 American soldiers and a small contingent of Afghan National Army forces. If the intelligence was accurate, they would be significantly outnumbered. "Our job will be to defend the northern perimeter," Thompson continued. "Rodriguez, your position will be critical. The M249 will provide the backbone of our defensive fire along that sector." Maria nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Everything she had trained for, every challenge she had overcome, had led to this moment. The weapon that others had said she was unsuitable for would now be her tool for protecting her fellow soldiers. Over the next day, the base transformed into a fortress. Sandbags were repositioned, ammunition was redistributed, and defensive positions were reinforced. Maria worked with the other squad members to create an effective firing position that would give her maximum coverage of the northern approach routes. As she prepared her position, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, her squad had questioned whether she could handle the M249 during training exercises. Now, they were counting on her to use that same weapon to defend their lives against a determined enemy force. The M249 was cleaned and checked multiple times. Maria had arranged her ammunition belts for quick access, and tested her fields of fire from different positions. She had memorized the ranges to various landmarks and identified the most likely enemy approach routes. Every detail had been considered and planned. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains surrounding the base, Maria sat with her weapon and watched the horizon. Somewhere out there in the darkness, enemy fighters were moving into position for an attack that could come at any moment. The radio chatter from the command post indicated that surveillance drones had detected movement in the hills, but the exact timing of the assault remained unknown. Her squad mates moved quietly through their defensive positions, making final preparations and checking their equipment. The base had taken on an almost surreal quality in the fading light, with every soldier understanding that the next few hours would test everything they had learned about warfare and survival. Maria ran her hand along the familiar contours of the M249, feeling the confidence that came from months of intensive training and practice. The weapon that had once seemed too big and too powerful for her now felt like a natural extension of her body. She had proven herself capable during training, but real combat would be the ultimate test. As darkness fell completely over the Afghan landscape, Maria settled into her fighting position and waited. The Taliban fighters moving through the mountains didn't know they would soon face a soldier who had fought harder than anyone to earn her right to carry the M249. They were about to discover that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who had been underestimated from the beginning. The stage was set for a battle that would define not only Maria's military career, but also challenge every assumption about what made an effective machine gunner in modern combat. In a few hours, the weapon they had once said she was unsuitable for would become the key to saving dozens of American lives. The attack began at 0347 hours, with a thunderous explosion that shook the entire base. Maria jerked awake from a light sleep in her fighting position as mortar rounds began falling around the perimeter. The Taliban had chosen the darkest hour before dawn to launch their assault, hoping to catch the defenders off guard. "Contact north," came the shout from a nearby observation post. "Large force, moving down from the ridgeline." Maria quickly slid behind her M249 and peered through her night vision scope. What she saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of muzzle flashes were winking across the mountainside as Taliban fighters advanced in multiple waves toward the base perimeter. This wasn't the small, hit-and-run attack they had grown accustomed to. This was a full-scale assault designed to overrun their position. "Rodriguez, you see them?" Thompson's voice crackled through her radio. "Roger that, Sergeant. I count at least 40 fighters in the first wave, more behind them. Hold your fire until they get closer. We need to make every round count." Maria forced herself to remain calm as enemy bullets began snapping overhead. The Taliban fighters were advancing with discipline and coordination, using suppressing fire to cover their movement. They had obviously planned this attack carefully, studying the base's defensive positions and timing their assault for maximum effect. As the first wave of attackers moved within 300 meters of the perimeter, Thompson gave the order Maria had been waiting for. "Open fire!" The M249 roared to life in Maria's hands, sending a stream of tracer rounds toward the advancing enemy. She had trained for this moment countless times. But the reality of combat was unlike anything she had experienced. The sound was deafening. The muzzle flash temporarily blinded her night vision, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled her nostrils. But Maria's training took over. She controlled her bursts perfectly, firing 6 to 8 rounds at a time to prevent her barrel from overheating. She traversed smoothly between targets, forcing the Taliban fighters to take cover and disrupting their advance. The weeks of preparation and practice had made the weapon an extension of her body. "Good shooting, Rodriguez," Thompson called out, as several enemy fighters fell under her accurate fire. "Keep them pinned down. Keep them pinned down." The battle intensified as the Taliban brought up reinforcements. Maria watched through her scope as more fighters emerged from concealed positions in the rocks and began flanking movements around both sides of her squad's position. The defenders were clearly outnumbered, and the enemy was using their superior numbers to pressure multiple points simultaneously. Then disaster struck. An enemy mortar round exploded just meters from the squad's position, killing 2 soldiers instantly and wounding 3 others. Thompson was among the wounded, clutching a bleeding arm as he tried to maintain control of the defensive line. "We need to fall back to secondary positions," he shouted over the noise of battle. but Maria could see what Thompson couldn't from his position. The Taliban fighters were already moving to cut off their retreat route. If the squad tried to withdraw now, they would be caught in the open and slaughtered. Someone had to stay behind and provide covering fire to allow the wounded to be evacuated safely. "Negative on the withdrawal, Sergeant," Maria called back. "I can hold them here." "Rodriguez, that's suicide. There are too many of them. Trust me, Sergeant. Get the wounded to safety. I'll cover your movement." Without waiting for permission, Maria shifted her position to get a better field of fire across the Taliban's advance route. She had calculated the angles perfectly. From her new position, she could engage multiple enemy positions while remaining concealed behind a reinforced concrete barrier. What happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come. As the Taliban fighters pressed their attack, confident that the defenders were breaking, they walked into a devastating wall of machine gun fire. Maria had positioned herself at the perfect choke point, forcing the enemy to expose themselves as they advanced. The M249 cycled continuously in her hands, the weapon performing flawlessly despite the intense rate of fire. Maria changed ammunition belts with practiced efficiency, never allowing a significant pause in her suppressive fire. She had memorized the exact ranges to key terrain features, allowing her to engage targets with deadly precision, even in the poor visibility of early morning. The Taliban fighters found themselves trapped between Maria's devastating fire and the secondary defensive positions where the rest of her squad had withdrawn. Caught in this crossfire, their attack began to falter. Fighters who moments before had been advancing confidently now scrambled for cover as Maria's accurate bursts found their marks. As dawn broke over the mountains, the scope of Maria's achievement became clear. Bodies of Taliban fighters were scattered across the northern approach, testimony to the effectiveness of her defensive fire. Intelligence later confirmed that over 180 enemy fighters had participated in the assault, with more than 50 casualties inflicted primarily by Maria's position. But the numbers only told part of the story. By holding her position when others would have retreated, Maria had prevented the Taliban from breaking through the base's northern perimeter. Her decision to stay behind and provide covering fire had saved not only her immediate squad, but also the 47 other American soldiers who would have been in the path of the enemy advance if the line had collapsed. When the medevac helicopters arrived to evacuate the wounded, Thompson sought out Maria at her fighting position. She was still behind the M249, scanning the horizon for any remaining threats. Her uniform was stained with gunpowder and sweat, and empty ammunition belts lay scattered around her position. "Rodriguez," Thompson said quietly, "that was the finest display of machine gun employment I've ever seen. You saved all our lives today." Other soldiers began gathering around Maria's position, word having spread quickly through the base about her actions during the battle. Many of these same soldiers had once questioned whether she was suitable for her role as a machine gunner. Now they looked at her with unmistakable respect and admiration. Captain Morrison arrived to personally assess the situation. After surveying the battlefield and receiving reports from the squad leaders, he approached Maria with an expression of awe. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your actions today were nothing short of extraordinary. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star." In the months that followed, Maria's story spread throughout the military community. The soldier who had been told she was too small for the M249 had used that weapon to achieve one of the most decisive defensive victories of the deployment. Military training programs began using her tactics as case studies in machine gun employment and defensive positioning. But for Maria, the greatest victory wasn't the medal or the recognition. It was the knowledge that she had proven every doubter wrong through skill, determination, and courage under fire. The M249 that others had said she was unsuitable for had become the instrument of salvation for 50 fellow soldiers. Years later, when new soldiers questioned whether they were strong enough or big enough for their assigned roles, instructors would tell them about Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. They would explain how the most effective warriors weren't always the biggest or the strongest, but those who combined technical skill with unwavering determination. The weapon they said she couldn't handle had ultimately handled one of the most challenging combat situations imaginable. Maria Rodriguez had not only proven herself suitable for the M249, she had shown that she was exactly what the weapon needed to reach its full potential in the hands of a truly exceptional soldier.